Aleister Crowley's Liber 81. The Butterfly Net. Moonchild. Chapter 8 of the Homunculus-Conclusion of the former argument concerning the nature of the soul. Now, if you look at the Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot, you're going to run into, they only really scientifically inaccurate things in that deck, you could say, relate to the homunculus. But is it scientifically inaccurate? Or is it the same sort of symbol that it always was? Anyways, I am going to be perfectly horrid, said Simon If, leaning over to Lisa and measuring his words with the minutest care. I am going to do everything possible to dampen your enthusiasm. I would rather have you start from cold and spark up well as you go, than have you go off with a spurt and find yourself without petrol in the middle of the big rise. I want you to take up this research because of your real love of knowledge, not because of your passion for Brother Cyril. And I tell you honestly that I am mortally afraid for you, because you live in extremes. It is good for a swift push to have that sudden energy of yours, but no research in science is to be taken by storm. You need infinite patience, nay, even infinite indifference to the very thing on which your heart is set. Well, that's one way to get rid of emotional ignorance. And of course, they think about a quarter of conversions are because of a lover, rather than what the faith is, right? Well, I have prated. The old man must utter his distrust of fiery youth. So we'll go on. I'm going to talk to you about the soul again. Remember our conception of it? The idea that seemed to do away with all the difficulties at a blow. We had the idea of the soul, of a real physical substance, one of whose surfaces, or rather boundary solids, was what we call body and mind. Body and mind are real too, and truly belong to the soul, but are only minute aspects of it, just as any ellipse or hyperbola is an aspect of the section of a cone. We'll take just one more analogy in the lower dimensions as we pass. How do solids know one another? Almost entirely by their surfaces, except in chemistry, which we have reason to believe to be a fourth dimensional science. Witness the phenomena of polarization and geometrical isomerism. Solids only make contact superficially. Then, shifting the analogy, as we did before, how do fourth dimensional beings know one another? By their bounding solids. In other words, my soul speaks to yours through the medium of our minds and bodies. That is the common phrase, quite so, but I am using it in an absolute physical sense. A line can only be aware of another line at a point of contact, a plane of another plane at the line where they cut, a cube of another cube at the surface, common to both, and a soul of another soul where the ideas are in conjuncture. I do want you to grasp this with every fiber of your being. I believe it to be the most important thesis ever enunciated, and you will be proud to learn that it is wholly Brother Cyril's, with no help from me. Hinton, Roseball, and others laid the foundations, but it was he that put it in such a clear light and correlated it with occult science. You must give the honor to Mahatera Fong, interjected Cyril. I was proving to him the metaphysical nature of the soul, and he regarded me with so amused a smile that I perceived my as an entity. Of course, there can be but one order of nature. In any case, continued if, this theory of Cyrils wipes the slate clean of every metaphysical speculation. Good and evil vanish instantly with realism and nominalism, and free will and determinism, and all the isms and all the ologies. Life is reduced to mathematical formula. Indeed, as the Victorian scientists rightly wish to do, but at the same time, mathematics is restored to her royal preeminence as not only the most exact, but the most exalted of the sciences. The intelligible order of things, moreover, becomes natural and inevitable, and such moral problems as the cruelty of organic life return to their real insignificance. The almost comic antinomy between man's size and his intelligence is reduced, and although the mystery of the universe remains unsolved, at least it is a rational mystery, and neither senseless nor intolerable. Let us now come down to a simple practical point. Here is a soul anxious to communicate with other souls. He can only do it by obtaining a mind and a body. Now you'll notice, taking that cone image of ours again, that any section of it is always one of three regular curves. It would not fit into a square, for example, however you turned it. And so our soul has to look about for some mind which will fit one of its sections. There is a great deal of latitude, no doubt, for the mind grows and is at first very plastic, but there must be some sort of relation. If I am a wandering soul and wish to communicate with the soul now manifesting a section of itself as professor of electricity at Oxford, it is useless for me to take the mind of a Hottentot. Cyrils sighed a doubt. I'm going to digress for a moment. Look at the finished product. Look at the finished product, the soul incarnated, as we may call it. There are three forces at work upon it: the soul itself, the heredity, and the environment. A clever soul will therefore be careful to choose the embryo, which seems most likely to be fairly free in the two latter respects. It will look for a healthy stock, for parents who will and can give the child every chance in life. You must remember that every soul is, from our point of view, a genius, for its world is so incalculably greater than ours. That one spark of its knowledge is enough to kindle a new epoch in mankind. But heredity and environment usually manage to prevent any of this coming to light. No matter how full of whiskey a flask may be, you will never make it drunk. So, we may perhaps conceive of some competition between souls for possession of different minds and bodies, or, let us say, to combine the ideas, different embryos. I hope you notice how this theory removes the objection to reincarnation, that one's mind does not remember the last time. Why should our cone make connection between its different curves? Each is so unimportant to it that it would hardly think of doing so. Yet there might be some similarity between successive curves in our case, lives, that might make an historian suspect that they were connected, just as a poet's style would be constant in some respects, whether he wrote a war story or a love lyric. And well, now there's that issue that higher intelligence and higher wealth actually factor into a greater chance of abortion. So people looking for the those material situations are actually more athletic too, actually has a higher incident. But even if there was a competition of souls, that wouldn't prove that they're all reincarnated. And why would they have to be reincarnated for that to be the case, for the competition between souls to start before birth, you know? Cousins, respects, whether you were a war story or a love lyric. You see, of course, by the way, how this theory does away with all the nonsense about are the planets inhabited, with its implication of idiotic waste if they be not. To us, every grain of dust, every jet of hydrogen on the sun's envelope is the manifestation of a section of some soul. And here we find ourselves quite suddenly and unexpectedly in line with some old Rosicrucian doctrines. This brings us to the consideration of certain experiments made by our predecessors. They had quite another theory of souls, at least. Their language was very different to ours, but they wanted very much to produce a man who should not be bound up in his heredity and should have the environment which they desired for him. They started in paraphysical ways. That is, they repudiated natural generation altogether. They made figures of brass and tried to induce souls to indwell them. In some accounts, we read that they succeeded. Firebraken was credited with one such homunculus. So was Albertus Magnus, and I think Paracelsus. He had at least a devil in his long sword, which taught him all the cunning pranks of past and future mountebanks. Our Samuel Butler, first of that dynasty, has lied. But other magicians sought to make this homunculus in a way closer to nature. In all these cases, they had held that environment could be modified at will by the application of telesmata, or sympathetic figures. Oh, what's the Arabic word that the thing comes from? But basically, a talisman completes a ritual, and an amulet is something that's it's like a god to people. It has its power, you could say. For example, a 9-pointed star would attract the influence which they called Luna, not meaning the actual moon, but an idea similar to the poet's ideas of her. By surrounding an object with such stars, with similarly disposed herbs, perfumes, metals, talismans, and so on, and by carefully keeping off all other influences of parallel methods, they hope to invest the original object so treated with the lunar qualities and no others. I am giving the briefest outline of an immense subject. Now, then they proceeded to try to make the homunculus on very curious lines. Man, said they, is merely a fertilized ovum, properly incubated. Heredity is there even at first, and, of course, but in a feeble degree. Anyhow, they could arrange any desired environment from the beginning. If they could only manage to nourish the embryo in some artificial way, incubate it, in fact, as is done with chickens today. Furthermore, and this is the crucial point, they thought that by performing this experiment in a specially prepared place, a place protected magically against all incompatible forces, and by invoking in that place some one force which they desired, some tremendously powerful being, angel or archangel, and they had conjurations which they thought capable of doing this, that they would be able to cause the incarnation of beings of infinite knowledge and power, who would be able to bring the whole world into light and truth. I may conclude this little sketch by saying that the idea has been almost universal in one form or other. The wish has always been for a Messiah or Superman, and the method some attempt to produce man by artificial or at least abnormal means. Well, perhaps that's why we thought of the whole test tube thing, right? Greek and Roman legend is full of stories in which this mystery is thinly veiled. They seem mostly to derive from Asia Minor and Syria. Here, exogamic principles have been pushed into an amusing extreme I need not remind you of the Persian formula for producing a magician, or of the Egyptian routine in the matter of Pharaoh, or of the Muslim device for inaugurating the millennium. And what do they mean by that? I did remind Brother Cyril, by the way, of this last point, and he did need it, but it did him no good. For here we are at the threshold of a great experiment on yet another false track. He is only taunting me to put me on my mettle, laughed Cyril. Now I'm going to bring all this to a point, went on the old mystic. The Greeks, as you know, practice a kind of eugenics. Of course, all tribal marriage laws are primarily eugenic in intention, but like the medieval magicians we were speaking of, with their homunculus, the Greeks attached the greatest possible importance to the condition of the mother during gestation. She was encouraged to look only on beautiful statues, to read only beautiful books. The Muslimeen, again, whose marriage system makes Christian marriage by comparison a thing for cattle, shut up a woman during that period, kept her perfectly quiet and free from the interference of her husband. Well, no, there's not those superstitions about pregnant women, but I mean, Islam doesn't advocate that, but you know, there is, you know, it is less of merely a breeding thing, you could say. So I guess the comparison is fair. This is all very good, but it falls short of Brother Cyril's latest lunacy. As I understand him, he wishes indeed to proceed normally in a physical sense, but to prepare the way by making the heredity and environment as attractive as possible to one special type of soul, and then to go soul fishing in the fourth dimension. Thus, he will have a perfectly normal child, which yet is also a homunculus in the medieval sense of the word. Well, perhaps trying to make a goal of making things so easy on one's spouse that they don't have to leave, that you go and take care of everything. And he has asked me to lend you the villa of the order at Naples for the purpose. Lisa had leant forward, her face between her hands was burning. Slowly she spake, "You know that you are asking me to sacrifice my humanity." She was not silly enough to pretend to misunderstand the proposal, and Simon liked her better for the way she took it. He thought a moment. "I see now, I never thought of it before, and I am foolish. The conservatism of woman calls this sort of thing a heartless experiment, yet nothing is farther from our thoughts. There will be no action to annoy or offend you, on the contrary. But I understand the feeling. It is the swift, natural repugnance to discuss what is sacred." "Tut, tut, my memory is always failing me these days," muttered Cyril. "I've quite forgotten the parentage of children that were born blind in 1861. That's the year the Civil War started in America, right? Lisa started to her feet. She did not know what he meant, but in some way it stung her like a serpent. Simon intervened. "Brother Cyril, you always use strong medicine," he said, shaking his head. "I sometimes think you're too keen to see your results. I hate to beat about the bush. I say the thing that can never be forgotten, or forgiven sometimes," the old man said in gentle reproof. "But come, my dear, sit down," he meant. "Truth, after all, and truth cuts only to cure. It's a brutal fact that children used to be born blind, literally by the thousand, because it wasn't quite nice to publish the facts about certain diseases, and precautions against them were called heartless experiments. What Cyril is asking you to do is no more than what your whole heart craves for, and he wants to crown that with a gift to humanity, such as has never yet been given. Suppose that you succeed, that you can attract a soul to you who will find a way to abolish poverty, or to cure cancer, or to, Surely you glow with vision, 1,000 heights of human progress thrusting their sunlit snows through the clouds of doubt. Lisa rose again to her feet, but her mood was no longer the same. She put her hands in Simon Ip's. I think you're a very noble man, she said, and it's an honor to work in such a cause. Cyril took her in his arms. Then you will come with me to Naples, to the master's own villa. Pause. Okay. She looked at If with a queer smile. May I make a joke? She said. I should like to rechristen the villa, the Butterfly Net. Simple Simon laughed with her like a child. It was just the delicate humor that appealed to him, and the classical allusion to the butterfly as allegorical of the soul showed him a side of the girl that he had hardly suspected. But Cyril Gray swerved instantly to the serious aspect of the problem. We have merely been discussing an A-B case, he said. We have forgotten where we stand. Somewhere or other I have made a blunder already, mark you, and we have the Black Lodge on our trail. You may possibly recall some of the events of yesterday, he concluded, with a touch of his old airy manner. Yes, said Simon. I think you had better get to business. We discussed the thing on general terms. On general lines during your vigil last night, said Cyril. Our first need is defense. The strongest form of defense is counterattack. But you should arrange for that to take shape as far as possible from the place you are defending. In this game, you're keeping goal, Lisa. I am full back. Simple Simon is the captain playing at halfback, and I think we have a fairly fit 11. So that's all right. There is reason to believe that the enemy's goal is in Paris itself, and if we can keep the ball in their half all through the game, you and I can spend a very quiet year in Italy. I can't follow all that football slang, but do explain why anyone should want to interfere with us. It's too silly. It's only silly when you get to the very distant end of a most abstruse philosophy. On the surface, it's obvious. It's the objection of the burglar to electric lights and bells. You can imagine him having enough foresight to vote against a town councillor who proposed an appropriation for the study of science in general. Something might turn up which would put him out of business. But what is their business? Ultimately, you may call it selfishness. Only that's a dreadful word and will mislead you. We're just as selfish. Only we realize that other things beyond our own consciousness are equally ourselves. For instance, I try to unite myself as intimately as I can with every other mind or body or idea that comes in my way. To take that cone simile, I want to be all the different curves I can, so as to have a better chance of realizing the cone. The Black Lodge magician clings to his one curve, tries to make it permanent, to exalt it above all other curves. And of course, the moment the cone shifts, out he goes. Pop. Observe the poet, remarked Simon F. He values himself enormously, but his idea of perpetuating himself is to make the beauty that is inherent in his own soul radiate beyond him, so as to illumine every other mind in the world. But your black magician is secret and difficult of access. He isn't going to tell anyone anything, not he. So even his knowledge tends to extinction in the long run. But you are yourselves a secret society, exclaimed Lisa, only to secure freedom from interruption. It is merely the same idea as that which makes every householder close his doors at night. Are better, as public libraries are guarded by certain regulations. We can't allow lunatics to scrawl over our unique manuscripts and tear the pages out of all our books. Shallow people are always chattering about science being free to all. The truth is that it is guarded as no other secret ever was in all history, by the simple fact that with all the help in the world, it takes half a lifetime to begin to master even one small section of it. We guard magic just as much as and as little as our other branches of physics, but people are so stupid that, though they know it requires years of training to use so simple an instrument as a microscope, they are indigent. That we cannot teach them to use the verendum in an hour. Ah, but they complain that you have never produced the use of a verendum at all. Only those who have not learnt its use. I can read Homer, but I can only prove the fact to another man by teaching him Greek, and he is then obliged to do the same to a third party, and so on. People generally acquiesce that some men can read Homer because, well, it is their intellectual laziness. A really stout intelligence would doubt it. Spiritualism and Christian Science, which are either fraud or bluff, or misinterpretation of the facts, has spread all over the Anglo-Saxon world because there is no true critical spirit amongst the half-educated. But we are not willing to have our laboratories invaded by reporters and curiosity mongers. We are dealing with delicate forces. We have to train our minds. We, with an intensity which no other study in the world demands. Public indifference and incredulity suit us perfectly. The only object of advertisement would be to get suitable members, but we have methods of finding them without publicity. We make no secret of our methods and results, on the other hand, but only the right man knows how to discover them. It is not as if we're working in an old field where all the terms were defined and the main laws ascertained. In magic, even more than in any other science, the student must keep his practical level with his theory. Don't you ever do magic under test conditions? Unfortunately, my child, creative magic, which is the thaumaturgic side of the business, depends on a peculiar excitation, which objects to test conditions very strongly. You might as well ask Cyril to prove his poetic gift, or even his manhood before a set of fools. He will produce you poems and infants and events, as the case may be, but you have more or less to take his word for it that he did the acts responsible primarily for them. Another difficulty about true magic is that it is so perfectly a natural process that its phenomena never excite surprise except by their timeliness, so that one has to record hundreds of experiments to set up a case, which would even begin to exclude coincidence. For example, I want a certain book. I use my book-producing talisman. The following day, a bookseller offers me the volume. One experiment proves nothing. My ability to do it every time is the proof, and I can't even do that under test conditions, for it is necessary that I should really want the book in my subconscious, whose will works the miracle. It is useless for me to think or pretend that I want it. Any man may fluke a 10-shot at billiards, but you call him a player only when you can average a break of 30 or so every time he goes to the table. But in some branches of magic, we can give proof on the spot in any branch that is where the female and not the male part of us is concerned. The analogy is quite perfect. Thus, in my guess, at your birth hour, was not that a test? I will do it all day and be right 5 times in 6. Hence it being a mind thing rather than a spirit thing. Further, in the event of error, I will show you exactly why I was wrong. It's a case where one is sometimes right to be wrong. As I'll explain one day, then again, your own clairvoyance. I did not tell you that sort of a thing to look for. yet you saw it under the same form as I did. You shall practice these things daily with Cyril if you like, always checking your results in a way which he will show you, and in a month you will be an expert. Then if you feel you want to advertise, do, but you won't. Besides, the real trouble is that not one person in 1,000 cares for any form of science whatever, even such base applications of science as the steam engine and all its family, from the telegraph to the automobile, were only thrust upon unwilling people by bullies who knew that there was money in them. Who are your men of science in the popular notion of today? Edison and Marconi? Neither of whom ever invented anything, but were smart businessmen with the capacity to exploit the brains of others and turn science to commercially useful and profitable ends. I don't know, Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and stuff like this, but then they weren't, they were more scientists than that. And I think it wasn't Edison more of one than that, but anyways. Go. We're a long way from our subject, said Cyril. I have had a delightful morning. I have felt like Plato with the good, the true, and the beautiful in contemplating you three, but we have work before us. I propose this emergency to copy the tactics of Washington at Valley Forge. We will make a direct and vehement attack on the Black Lodge. They will expect me to be in my usual position in the van. I will slip away with Lisa while the fires blaze brightest. A sound plan, said Simon. Let us break up this conference and put it immediately into execution. You'd better not attract attention by collecting luggage, and you must certainly take no person outside the order into your circle. So after dinner, you will put on your other clothes, walk down the metro, cross to the Gare Lyon, the Gare de Lyon, and jump into the Rhone Rapide. Wire me when you arrive at the butterfly net. And, well, Chapter 9, how they brought the bad news from Arago to Quincampoix, and what action was taken thereupon. Quincampoix. I think you don't pronounce the X.